I was standing barefoot on our front porch at 11:42 p.m., my suitcase half-zipped at my feet, when my father looked me in the eyes and said, "Don't come back. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 16 years old, and that was the night I stopped being their daughter." 3 hours earlier I had been sitting at our kitchen table, the same table where we ate Thanksgiving dinners and birthday cakes, staring at a glass of water I couldn't bring myself to drink. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My mother kept pacing back and forth, arms crossed, her voice tight and controlled in a way that scared me more than yelling ever could. "Just tell me the truth, Emily," she said, softer this time. "You can trust me." And I believed her. I really did. Because for 16 years I had been the quiet one. The one who followed rules, who got decent grades, who didn't cause problems. Not like my younger sister, Lily, who seemed to shine in every room she walked into. Lily with her perfect GPA, her varsity soccer jacket, her photo on the fridge. Lily, who never made mistakes that needed explaining. I thought maybe, just maybe, this was the moment my mom would choose me. So I told her. I told her everything, my voice barely above a whisper, like saying it too loud might make it more real. I watched her face change, not all at once but slowly, like a door closing inch by inch. The softness disappeared first, then the concern. And finally something colder settled in. Something final. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just picked up her phone and walked into the other room. I remember staring at the family photos on the wall while I waited. Christmas mornings, beach vacations, school pictures where I was always slightly off to the side. I didn't realize then that I was looking at the last version of my life where I still belonged in those frames. When my dad came home 20 minutes later, he didn't even take off his coat. My mom had already told him. Of course she had. The three of us sat in the living room like strangers. No one offered me a blanket. No one asked if I was okay. My dad just stood there, hands on his hips, looking at me like he was trying to solve a problem. "Is it true?" he asked. I nodded. That was all it took. Everything shifted in that moment. The way he looked at me, the way my mother avoided my eyes, the silence that filled the room like something heavy and permanent. I tried to explain. I told them I was still going to school, that I would figure it out, that I wasn't asking them for anything except, I didn't even know what I was asking for. Understanding, maybe, or just not to be alone. But my father didn't hear any of it. "You've embarrassed this family," he said, his voice calm in a way that made it worse. "Do you have any idea what people will say?" People. Not me. Not us. Just people. I felt something in my chest crack, but I kept talking anyway, because I thought if I said the right thing, if I stayed calm, if I proved I wasn't a mistake, they would change their minds. I didn't know then that the decision had already been made the moment my mom picked up that phone. That night, everything I thought was permanent vanished in a matter of hours. And I didn't realize it yet, standing there in that living room, but losing my family was only the beginning of what I was about to become. The front door closed behind me with a sound that was not loud but felt final, like something sealing shut that would never open the same way again. And I stood there for a second staring at the wood grain, like if I just waited long enough someone might come back and say they did not mean it, that this was all some kind of mistake, but no one came, not my mother, not my father, not even Lily, and the porch light flicked off a few seconds later like I had already been erased from the house. Entirely. So I picked up my suitcase, the cheap one with the broken zipper that never fully stayed shut, and I walked down the driveway trying to remember how to breathe because everything felt too tight in my chest, like the air had turned thick. And I kept thinking, this cannot be real, this cannot be happening to me, but it was, and there was no one left to say otherwise. I checked my phone 3 times before I even reached the sidewalk. No messages, no missed calls, nothing. And when I tried to call my mom, it went straight to voicemail. When I tried again, it did the same thing. And that was when I realized she had already blocked my number. Just like that, one tap and I was gone. I stood under the streetlight at the corner for what felt like forever, watching cars pass by like the world was still moving normally while mine had just stopped. And I did not know where to go because every place I had ever belonged was behind that door that was now locked. I thought about going back and knocking just once just to see if maybe they would open it, but something inside me knew they would not, so instead I scrolled through my contacts with shaking hands until I found the only name I could think of, Sarah Mitchell. She was not even my best friend, just someone from school who had once told me if I ever needed anything I could call her. I did not know if she meant it. I did not know if anyone ever really means things like that, but I called anyway. And when she answered, I could not even get the words out at first. I just stood there silent, trying not to cry because I did not want to sound like someone falling apart. But she waited and then she said, "Emily, are you okay?" And something about the way she said my name made everything crack, so I told her not everything, just enough. I said I needed a place to stay for a night or two. I said I would not be any trouble. I said I would figure things out soon, and there was a pause on the other end that felt like it lasted forever. And in that pause I could already feel the rejection coming, because why would anyone want to take on someone like me? Someone who had just been thrown away by her own family. But then she said, "Come over, I will text you the address." Just like that, no questions, no judgment, and I almost dropped my phone from how fast my hands started shaking. I walked 3 blocks to the nearest bus stop because I did not have a car. I did not have money for a ride. I barely had anything at all except the clothes in that half-zipped suitcase and the reality I was still trying to catch up to. The bus ride felt longer than it probably was. Every stop felt like another reminder that I was moving further away from everything I had known. I kept replaying my father's voice in my head, the way he said it so calmly, like he was talking about something simple and obvious, not something that would change my entire life. And I realized something. Sitting there by the window watching the dark streets blur past, they were not going to come after me, not tonight, not tomorrow, maybe not ever. And that thought settled into me in a way that was colder than anything I had felt before. Because it meant this was not just a moment, it was a decision, and I was the only one who had to live with it. But what I did not understand yet, sitting on that bus with my suitcase pressed against my knees, was that this was not the lowest point, not even close, because the hardest part was not being kicked out. It was everything that came after when no one was there to catch me. Sarah lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment above a convenience store on the edge of town, the kind of place you would never notice unless you were looking for it. And when I got off the bus and walked up the narrow stairs with my suitcase bumping against each step, I kept thinking I did not belong there either, like I was just moving from one place that did not want me to another that would eventually feel the same. But when she opened the door, she did not look at me like I was a problem. She just stepped aside and said, "Come in," like it was the most normal thing in the world, and that almost made it harder to hold myself together. Her apartment smelled like laundry detergent and something warm cooking on the stove. And for a second I forgot everything because it felt like walking into a life where things were still okay. She cleared a space on the couch for my suitcase and handed me a glass of water without asking questions, and I realized how long it had been since anyone had done something simple like that for me without expecting something in return. I sat there gripping the glass with both hands because they were still shaking, and she finally asked, "Do your parents know where you are?" And I did not know how to answer that because technically they knew exactly where I was not, which was home. And that was all that seemed to matter to them, so I just said, "They do not want me there." And she nodded slowly like she understood more than I had actually said. She did not push, she did not ask about the pregnancy, she did not ask about the father, she just said, "You can stay here for a few days, we will figure something out." And I nodded even though I had no idea what something even looked like anymore. That night I lay on her couch staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing below, and I kept waiting for my phone to light up, for my mom to call, for my dad to text something, anything. Even just one message that said, "Come back, we can talk." But the screen stayed dark, and every hour that passed made it more real that no one was coming. The next morning I woke up before Sarah, still in the same clothes, and for a few seconds I forgot where I was. I thought I was still in my room at home, that maybe last night had been some kind of nightmare. But then I saw my suitcase on the floor and everything came back all at once, heavy and undeniable. I checked my phone again, still nothing, not even a missed call, and when I opened social media out of habit, I saw something that made my stomach drop. My mom had posted a picture of Lily at her soccer game with the caption, "So proud of our girl." Like nothing had happened, like our family was still intact, like I had never existed in that picture at all. I stared at it longer than I should have, trying to understand how someone could move on that fast, how they could erase one child and keep celebrating another without missing a beat. And that was when it hit me, this was not temporary, this was not a punishment that would end when they cooled down, this was a replacement. Lily was still their daughter, and I was not. I put my phone down because I could feel something building in my chest that I could not let out, not here, not in someone else's apartment, not when I was already taking up space I was not sure I deserved. Later that day I tried calling home again just once more, hoping maybe the silence had been a mistake, but it went straight to voicemail again, and this time I did not leave a message because I finally understood they were not waiting to hear from me. They had already decided they would not listen, and sitting there on that couch in a place that was not mine, with a future I could not see clearly yet, I realized something that scared me more than being alone. I was going to have to build a life from nothing, with no safety net, no backup plan, and no one to catch me if I fell, and I did not know if I was strong enough for that. But what I did not realize then was that this was the moment everything started to change, even if it did not feel like it yet. The next few days blurred together in a way that made it hard to tell where one ended and the next began. Like time had lost its structure and I was just drifting through it without any real direction. I stayed on Sarah's couch, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. Folding the same set of clothes over and over like keeping things neat would somehow make my situation feel more under control. She went to school like normal. She talked about assignments and teachers and things that used to matter to me too, and I would nod like I was still part of that world even though I could already feel myself slipping out of it. I did not tell anyone at school what happened. I could not, because saying it out loud would make it real in a way I was not ready for. And besides, I already knew how people talked. I had heard the whispers about other girls, the looks, the judgment, the way their names became stories instead of people. I was not ready to become that, but avoiding it did not stop reality from moving forward. I started thinking about practical things I had never had to think about before, like money, like where I would go after a few days, like how long I could stay without becoming a burden. I checked my bank account and saw a number that suddenly felt too small to mean anything, a couple $100 from part-time work that I had always thought was enough for small things, gas, snacks, a movie ticket, but now it looked like nothing I searched for. Jobs on my phone late at night, scrolling through listings for part-time positions, retail, fast food, anything that would hire someone my age without too many questions, but every listing felt like it belonged to a different version of me, a version that still had a home to go back to at the end of a shift. I realized I needed more than a job. I needed a plan, and I did not have one. One evening Sarah sat across from me at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and she finally asked the question I had been avoiding, "What are you going to do?" And I did not have an answer, not a real one. I said something vague about figuring it out, about maybe finding work, maybe looking into programs, but even as I said it I could hear how uncertain it sounded. She nodded, but I could tell she was worried, not just for me but for what this meant long term, because a few days turns into a week, and a week turns into something harder to sustain, and I could not blame her for thinking that way. I was thinking it too. That night I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, but this time I was not waiting for a call anymore. I was doing something else, something quieter but heavier. I was letting go of the idea that anyone was coming to fix this, that there was some adult who would step in and make things right, because there was just me, and for the first time I allowed myself to think about the baby not as a problem, not as the reason everything fell apart, but as something real, something that was going to be part of my life no matter what happened next. And that thought changed something in me in a way I could not fully explain yet. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but it was there, a shift from panic to something closer to resolve. I did not know how I was going to do it. I did not know where I would live, how I would finish school, how I would afford anything, but I knew one thing with a kind of clarity I had not felt before. I could not keep waiting for people who had already chosen to leave me behind, because if I did, I would never move forward, and I did not realize it yet. But that quiet decision, made alone in the dark on someone else's couch, was the first real step toward becoming someone they would never expect me to be. The next morning I made a decision that felt bigger than anything I had ever decided before, not because it was dramatic or loud, but because it was quiet and final. I was not going to stay on that couch waiting for my life to figure itself out for me. I got up early before Sarah left for school, and I asked if I could borrow her laptop for a few hours. She nodded without hesitation and slid it across the table like she already trusted me more than I trusted myself. I opened it and started searching, not for jobs this time, but for something else, something that felt like a way forward instead of just survival. I typed in phrases I had never thought about before: programs for pregnant teens, housing assistance, continuing school while expecting a baby, and page after page loaded with information I had never paid attention to because I never thought I would need it, but now every word felt like it mattered. I wrote things down on a piece of paper: phone numbers, addresses, names of organizations, anything that looked like it could help, and for the first time since that night, I felt something shift from panic to action. Later that afternoon I called one of the numbers with my hand shaking so badly I almost hung up before it rang. But a woman answered with a calm voice and asked how she could help, and I froze for a second because I did not know how to summarize my entire life falling apart into a single sentence, but I forced myself to say it. I said I was 16, I said I did not have a place to stay, I said I needed help figuring out what to do next, and there was a pause, not the kind that felt like judgment, but the kind that felt like someone actually listening. She asked me a few questions, simple ones: if I was safe, if I had somewhere to stay for the next few days, and I answered as clearly as I could. And then she said something I did not expect. She said, "We can help you, you are not alone in this." And I almost laughed because it felt so different from everything I had just experienced, but I did not laugh, I just nodded even though she could not see me. She gave me an address and told me to come in the next morning. She said they had counselors, resources, people who could help me make a plan. And when I hung up the phone, I just sat there staring at the number like it was something fragile that could disappear if I looked away. That evening I told Sarah I had somewhere to go, somewhere that might help me figure things out, and she smiled in a way that looked like relief, not because she wanted me to leave but because she wanted me to have something stable, something real. And I realized then how much of a difference it made to have even one person who did not see you as a problem to get rid of. The next day I took the bus again, but this time it felt different, not easier but more intentional, like I was going somewhere instead of just away from something. The building was small and plain, nothing impressive, but when I walked inside, no one looked at me like I did not belong. No one asked me why I was there in a tone that made me feel small. They just welcomed me, sat me down, and asked me what I needed. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I started to believe that maybe I could build something out of what was left. Maybe not the life I had planned, but something else, something that was mine, and I did not realize it yet, sitting in that small office with a list of options in front of me. But this was the moment where my story stopped being about what I had lost and started becoming about what I was going to create. I sat across from a woman named Karen in a small office with beige walls and a desk covered in neatly stacked folders, and she spoke to me like I was still a person with a future instead of someone who had just lost everything. She asked me about school, about what I wanted before all of this happened, and I realized I had not thought about what I wanted in days, maybe longer, because survival had taken over everything else. I told her I liked science, that I had been doing well in my classes, that I had planned to graduate and maybe go into something medical one day, and saying it out loud felt strange, like I was talking about a different version of myself that I was not sure still existed, but she nodded like it mattered, like it was still possible. She explained that there were programs that could help me stay in school, that I did not have to drop out, that there were options for housing, for healthcare, for support, and every word felt like something I had not been allowed to believe since the night I was told to leave. She handed me a folder with information, real steps, real numbers, things I could actually follow instead of just hoping something would work out. And I held it carefully like it was something fragile, because in a way it was the first real path forward I had been given. She asked me if I had any identification, any documents, and I hesitated because most of my things were still at my parents' house, things I was no longer sure I could access. But she said they could help me request what I needed, that there were ways to rebuild even without everything in place, and that word stayed with me, rebuild, because that was exactly what this was, not fixing, not going back, but building something new from whatever I had left. Later that day they showed me a small shared living space, a place where other girls in situations like mine stayed temporarily while they figured things out. It was not perfect, it was not home, but it was safe. It had beds, a kitchen, people who understood without needing long explanations, and for the first time since I stood on that porch, I felt something close to stability. I moved my suitcase into a small corner of a room I would share, setting it down like I was claiming a piece of space that was finally mine. Even if it was temporary, that night I lay in a different bed, in a different place, surrounded by people whose stories I did not know yet, but could somehow feel, and I stared at the ceiling again. But this time I was not waiting for my phone to light up. I was thinking about what came next, about school, about work, about the baby, about how I was going to make all of this fit together into something that resembled a life. It was still overwhelming, still uncertain, but it was no longer empty. There were steps now, small ones but real, and I realized something as I lay there, something that settled quietly but firmly inside me. I was not just surviving anymore, I was starting to build, and even though I did not know how far I would get or how hard it would be, I knew I was moving forward in a way that no one could take away from me. But what I did not realize then was how much I would have to change to keep going, and how different I would become from the girl who once believed her family would always be there. The routine started quietly, almost unnoticeably, like something that built itself piece by piece until it became the only way forward. I knew mornings came early now, earlier than they ever had before, because I was no longer waking up for school alone. I was waking up for something bigger, something that depended on me whether I felt ready or not. I would sit at the small table in the shared kitchen with a notebook open, writing down everything I needed to keep track of, appointment times, school assignments, work shifts I was trying to pick up, and every time I looked at that list it felt impossible and necessary at the same time. The counselors helped me re-enroll in classes through an alternative program that allowed me to continue my education while managing everything else. It was not the same as sitting in a classroom with familiar faces. It was smaller, quieter, more focused, but in a strange way it felt more real, because everyone there was carrying something, everyone had a reason for being there, and no one pretended otherwise. I kept my head down, I listened, I did the work, not because it was easy but because it was one of the few things I could control. In the afternoons I picked up hours at a small grocery store a few blocks away, nothing glamorous, just stocking shelves, organizing products, learning how to stand on my feet for hours at a time without letting the exhaustion show. My manager did not ask too many questions, which I appreciated. He just told me what needed to be done and expected me to do it, and I did because I needed the paycheck. Every dollar mattered now in a way it never had before. I started keeping track of every expense, every small purchase, learning how quickly money could disappear and how careful I had to be to make it last. At night I would return to the shared living space, sit on my bed, and review everything I had done that day, not in a way that judged me, but in a way that kept me moving forward, because stopping, even for a moment, felt dangerous, like I might fall back into that feeling of being lost with no direction. There were moments when the weight of everything would hit me all at once, like when I saw other girls my age laughing outside the store, carefree in a way I used to be, or when I passed families walking together and felt that quiet ache of something I could not go back to. But I learned how to push those moments aside, not ignore them, but not let them stop me either. I started to understand something that I had never needed to before. Strength was not loud, it was not dramatic, it was showing up every day when no one was watching, doing what needed to be done even when it felt overwhelming. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, almost without noticing, I built a rhythm: school, work, appointments, rest, repeat. It was not the life I had imagined, but it was a life I was building with my own hands, and that made it different, that made it mine. There were still nights when I wondered if my parents ever thought about me, if my mother ever hesitated before posting another picture, if my father ever questioned what he had done. But those thoughts became quieter over time, less sharp, less consuming, because I had something else to focus on now, something that required all of me, and I did not realize it yet. But with every day I kept going, I was becoming someone they would not recognize, someone who no longer needed their approval to exist, someone who was learning how to stand on her own, even when the ground felt unsteady beneath her feet. The first time I felt him move, I was sitting on the edge of my bed late at night with my notebook open, trying to finish an assignment that suddenly did not seem as important as it had an hour before. It was small, almost like a flutter, something I could have ignored if I had not been paying attention, but I felt it, clear enough to make me stop completely, my pen hovering above the page as I waited to see if it would happen again. And when it did, just as soft but undeniable, something inside me shifted in a way that I had not experienced before. It was not fear, not panic, not even the overwhelming pressure I had been carrying for months. It was something quieter but stronger, something that felt like connection, like a reminder that I was not just building a life for myself anymore. I was building it for someone else too. I placed my hand gently against my stomach, still trying to process that this was real, that everything I had been working toward, every long day, every decision, every moment of doubt was leading to this. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I did not feel like I was just reacting to what happened to me. I felt like I was choosing what happened next. The days after that moment felt different, not easier, but more focused, like everything had a clearer purpose. I started attending prenatal appointments regularly, sitting in waiting rooms with women who looked like they had their lives together in ways I was still figuring out. But no one there knew my story unless I told them, and I realized I did not have to carry that label everywhere. I could just be another person doing what needed to be done. The nurse would call my name, ask routine questions, measure things I was still learning to understand, and every time I heard that steady, rhythmic sound of a heartbeat through the monitor, it grounded me in a way nothing else could. It was consistent, reliable, something I could count on when everything else had changed. I started preparing in small ways, picking up secondhand baby clothes from donation centers, folding them carefully and placing them in a small drawer that I shared with my own things. Each piece felt like a quiet promise, something tangible that said I was getting closer to a moment I could not fully imagine yet. At work I pushed myself harder, picking up extra shifts when I could, saving every dollar, calculating what I would need for the next few months, learning how to stretch what little I had into something that could sustain two people instead of one. It was exhausting. There were nights when I could barely keep my eyes open, when my body felt like it was running on something thinner than energy. But I kept going because stopping was not an option, not anymore, and slowly, without realizing it, I stopped looking back as often. I stopped checking my phone hoping for something that was never going to come. I stopped wondering what my parents were doing or if they ever thought about me, because my focus had shifted entirely to what was right in front of me, to what I was building, to who I was becoming. And then one evening, sitting in that same shared room, surrounded by folded clothes and a future that was starting to take shape, I realized something that both steadied me and scared me at the same time. I was not just surviving this anymore, I was creating something new out of it, something that no one else had given me and no one else could take away. But I did not know yet how much that would matter years later, when the people who walked away would suddenly want to come back. The day Noah was born did not feel like the dramatic moment people describe in movies. It was quieter than that, more focused, like the entire world had narrowed down to a single point in time where nothing else existed except what was happening right in front of me. I remember gripping the edge of the hospital bed, the bright lights above me, the steady voices of nurses guiding me through something I had never done before but somehow had to get through. And then suddenly there he was, small, real, and unmistakably mine, and everything else that had happened before that moment felt distant, like it belonged to a different version of my life. They placed him in my arms and I just stared at him, trying to understand how something so small could completely change everything inside me. His eyes were closed, his breathing soft and steady, and for the first time in months, I felt something that was not fear or pressure or uncertainty. I felt calm, not because things were easy, but because I knew exactly what mattered now. The hospital room was quiet after everything settled, machines humming softly in the background, and I sat there holding him, afraid to move too much, like I might somehow break the moment if I did. I did not have family gathered around me, no parents waiting outside, no one pacing the hallway. It was just me and him, and strangely, that did not feel as empty as I thought it would, because I was not alone anymore. I had him, and that changed the meaning of everything. The next few days were a blur of learning how to hold him properly, how to feed him, how to recognize the difference between a cry that meant he was hungry and one that meant he just needed to be close. Every small thing felt like something I had to master quickly, because there was no one else to rely on, no one stepping in to take over. But the nurses were patient, showing me what I needed to know, answering questions I did not even realize I had until I was in the middle of figuring things out, and I listened carefully, absorbing everything, because I knew once I left that hospital, it would all be on me. When they asked me what his name was, I did not hesitate. I said Noah because it felt right, simple, strong, something that could carry him forward no matter where life took us. And writing it down on the paperwork felt like making something official, something permanent that no one could take away. Bringing him back to the shared living space felt different than returning alone. Everything looked the same walls, the same small bed, but it felt completely changed because now it held more than just me. I set up the small area I had prepared, placing him carefully in the crib I had gotten secondhand, watching him sleep like I was memorizing every detail, every movement, every sound. The nights were the hardest, waking up every few hours, adjusting to a rhythm that was no longer my own, learning how to function on less rest than I thought was possible. But even in those moments when exhaustion pressed down on me, there was something steady underneath it all, something that kept me going, because every time I looked at him I was reminded why I could not stop, why I could not give up. Weeks turned into months and slowly I found my way through it, balancing work, school, and caring for him in a way that was not perfect but was real. And with every day that passed, I became more certain of something I had once doubted. I was capable of this. I was capable of building a life not just for myself but for him too, and I did not realize it then, but while I was learning how to become a mother, I was also becoming someone my past would no longer be able to define. Time did not slow down after Noah was born. It sped up in a way that made every day feel shorter than it should have been. Like there were never enough hours to fit everything I needed to do. Mornings started before the sun came up, feeding him, getting ready for work, preparing whatever I could for the day ahead, and then moving through it all in a rhythm I had built through trial and error. There was no perfect system, just adjustments, small changes that made things slightly more manageable. Each week I returned to work sooner than I thought I would, not because I felt ready, but because I had to. Leaving him for those hours was one of the hardest things I had done, even though I knew he was in a safe childcare program connected to the support center. I still found myself checking the time constantly, counting down the minutes until I could see him again, but I kept going because every shift, every paycheck, every saved dollar was part of something bigger. I continued my classes at night, studying while he slept, sometimes with him resting against my chest, his breathing steady as I read through assignments that felt both important and distant at the same time. There were nights when I felt like I was barely holding everything together, when exhaustion made even simple tasks feel heavy, but I learned how to move through it. Not perfectly, but consistently, and consistency became my strength. Months turned into years in a way that felt gradual but undeniable. Noah grew, from a newborn in my arms to a toddler taking his first steps across the small room, reaching for me with a smile that made every difficult moment feel worth it. His laughter filled spaces that once felt empty, turning what had been temporary into something that felt like a real home, even if it was not permanent. I eventually moved out of the shared housing into a small one-bedroom apartment, nothing fancy, just enough space for the two of us, but it was ours. Every piece of furniture, every small decoration chosen with care, built from what I had earned, not given. I found better work over time, something more stable, something that allowed me to plan further ahead instead of just getting through each week, and I finished my schooling step by step, not on the timeline I once imagined, but in a way that was real and hard-earned. There were still moments when the past would surface, unexpected and sharp, like when I filled out forms that asked for emergency contacts, Or when Noah started asking simple questions about family, questions that I answered carefully, honestly, but in a way that protected him from things he did not need to carry. I told him we were our own family, and he accepted that with the kind of simplicity only a child can have, not questioning what was not there, only appreciating what was. And in those moments I realized something that had taken years to fully understand. I had not just survived what happened, I had built something stronger because of it, something independent, something that did not rely on the people who had walked away, and I stopped wondering if they would ever come back, because it no longer mattered in the way it once did. My life was full in a way I had created, not inherited, and I was no longer waiting for anything to complete it. But what I did not expect, what I could not have predicted no matter how far I had come, was that one day, without warning, the past I had learned to live without would suddenly reach out again. Not to apologize, not to explain, but for a reason that would change everything all over again. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of ordinary day that does not give you any warning before it changes everything. I was in the kitchen of our small apartment, standing by the counter cutting up an apple for Noah while he sat at the table coloring with crayons, talking to himself in that quiet, focused way he had when he was concentrating, and my phone rang, a number I did not recognize. I almost ignored it, because most unknown calls were either spam or something that could wait. But something made me pause just for a second, and then I answered, "Hello." There was a brief silence on the other end, not long, but enough to feel intentional, and then a voice I had not heard in over 10 years said my name, Emily. Just like that, no introduction, no explanation, just my name, and everything inside me went still. I did not need to ask who it was. I knew immediately, even though his voice sounded older, heavier somehow. It was my father. And for a moment I could not speak. Not because I did not have words, but because there were too many of them all at once, questions, anger, disbelief, all colliding in a way that made it impossible to choose just one. So I said nothing, and he filled the silence instead. "I know this is unexpected," he said, his tone careful, measured, like he was stepping through something delicate. "But we need to talk. We, not I, not your mother, not your family, just we." Like that word could erase 10 years of silence. I leaned against the counter because I could feel my balance shifting, not physically but emotionally, like something I had carefully built inside. Myself was being tested. I looked over at Noah, still coloring, completely unaware of the shift happening just a few feet away from him, and I lowered my voice without thinking. "Why are you calling me?" I asked, and even to my own ears my voice sounded steady in a way I did not expect, like the years had given me something I did not have before, a kind of control I had earned piece by piece. There was another pause, longer this time, and then he said something that did not answer my question at all. "Your mother is here." As if that mattered, as if that changed anything. I closed my eyes for a second, taking in a breath I did not realize I was holding, and then I said, "That does not explain why you are calling." And I could hear the shift in his breathing on the other end, the slight hesitation before he spoke again, like he was deciding how much to say, how to say it, and then he said, "We heard about your son." And just like that, everything became clear in a way that was almost too sharp, too immediate. Not "How did you find me?" Not "Are you okay?" Not "We are sorry, but we heard about your son." And I felt something settle into place inside me, something firm and unmovable, because in that moment I understood this was not about me, not really. It was about him, about Noah, about something they wanted that had nothing to do with the years I had spent building a life without them. I looked at him again, sitting there with his crayons, completely unaware that he had just become the center of a conversation he did not even know existed, and I realized something that changed the way I was standing in that moment. I was not the same person who had stood on that porch 10 years ago. I was not the girl who had been waiting for them to choose me. I had already built a life where I was not waiting anymore. And now they were the ones reaching out, not from a place of regret, but from a place of need. And I did not know yet what they were going to ask for, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever it was, the answer would not be simple, because this time I was the one with something they wanted, and that changed everything. I did not respond right away, not because I did not have something to say, but because I needed a second to understand what I was hearing and what it meant. I walked a few steps away from the table, turning slightly so Noah could not see my face, even though he was still focused on his coloring, and I lowered my voice even more. "What about him?" I asked, and there was no softness in my tone this time, no hesitation, just a direct question that I knew he would have to answer. On the other end of the line I could hear movement, like he was adjusting his grip on the phone, like he was not as composed as he wanted to sound, and then my mother's voice came through, closer to the phone now. "Emily, please," she said, and that word alone, "please," felt so unfamiliar coming from her that it almost did not register at first. This was the same woman who had not called, not texted, not reached out once in 10 years, and now she was asking me for something. I stayed silent, letting her continue, because I wanted to hear exactly what they were going to say without interrupting, without making it easier for them to avoid the truth. "We did not know how to reach you," she added, and I almost let out a short laugh at that, not because it was funny, but because it was so clearly not the truth. They had known how to reach me before, they had chosen not to, and that difference mattered more than anything they could say now. "We heard that you have a son," she continued, her voice softer now, like she was trying to sound careful, "and we would like to meet him. Meet him, not see you, not reconnect, just meet him." And that was when the last piece fell into place. This was not about repairing anything that had been broken. This was about access, about stepping into a life they had walked away from as if they still had a place in it. I leaned against the wall, steadying myself, not because I felt weak, but because I wanted to stay grounded in what I knew was real, in everything I had built without them. "Why?" I asked, one word, simple, direct, and there was a longer pause this time, long enough that I could hear the faint background noise on their end, a television maybe, or voices in another room, normal life continuing while this conversation unfolded. And then my father spoke again, his voice lower now, less controlled than before. "Your sister is having some difficulties," he said, choosing his words carefully, and I felt that familiar name settle into the conversation like something from another life. "Lily, the one they had chosen, the one who had never been replaced. She has been trying to start a family," he continued, "and things have not been easy." And I understood before he even finished the sentence, before he connected the pieces in a way he thought would make sense to me. They were not calling because they missed me, they were calling because they needed something they could not get anywhere else, something I had built, something they had once rejected completely, and now suddenly saw value in. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking in a slow breath, because I could feel the weight of everything they were implying without saying it directly, the years of silence, the absence, the way they had removed me from their lives as if I did not matter. And now this request that was not even fully spoken yet but already clear. I opened my eyes and looked at Noah again, still sitting at the table, holding up his drawing like he was about to show me something, and I realized something with a clarity that left no room for doubt. Whatever they were asking for, whatever they thought they were entitled to now, it was not theirs to take, not anymore, because this time I was the one who decided what happened next. And I did not realize then how difficult that decision would be, or how much it would reveal about who they really were, and who I had become without them. I let the silence stretch just long enough for them to feel it, not as punishment, but as something they had not experienced from me before, control. And when I finally spoke, my voice was calm in a way that surprised even me. "No," I said, simple, direct, and final. There was an immediate reaction on the other end, not loud, not angry, but unsettled, like they had not prepared for that answer. Like somewhere in their minds they had assumed I would hesitate, that I would still be the girl who wanted their approval, who would say yes just to feel included again. But that version of me did not exist anymore. "Emily," my mother said quickly, her voice tightening, "you do not understand, this is important." And I almost stopped her there. But I let her continue because I wanted to hear exactly how far they were willing to go. "Your sister has been through a lot," she added, and that was when something inside me became completely clear, not sharp or emotional, just steady, because I realized that even now, after everything, the focus was still on Lily, still on what she needed, what she deserved, what she was going through, and I was still being positioned as the solution, not as a person, not as their daughter, just as a means to fix something for someone else. I shifted my weight slightly, watching Noah walk toward me with his drawing, holding it up with a small smile, completely unaware of the conversation unfolding. And I knelt down for a second, taking the paper from his hands. "This is amazing," I told him softly, and he beamed, satisfied, before running back to the table, and in that small moment, everything I needed to know settled into place. I stood back up and returned to the call. "You are right," I said, my voice still calm. "I do not understand. Because when I was 16 and I needed my family, you decided I was not important enough to stay." There was no immediate response, just quiet, and I continued, not raising my voice, not rushing, just stating what was real. "You did not call, you did not check on me, you did not ask if I was safe, you made a decision, and you lived with it for 10 years. I paused, letting that sit between us. "So now, I am making mine." My father tried to speak. I could hear it in the shift of air, but I did not stop, not this time. "Noah is not something you get to meet because it is convenient now. He is not something you get to be part of because you suddenly need something." My voice did not shake, it did not crack, it held steady in a way that felt earned, built from every day I had spent without them. He is my son and my responsibility, and I decide who gets to be in his life. There was another pause, heavier this time, and then my father said my name again, but it sounded different now, less certain, less in control. Emily, we are still your parents. And for a moment, I almost felt something at those words, not enough to change anything, but enough to recognize what they were trying to hold on to, and I answered honestly. No, you were my parents, I said, not with anger but with clarity. Now I am his. I ended the call before they could respond, not because I wanted the last word, but because there was nothing left to say. I stood there for a second, the phone still in my hand, the apartment quiet except for the soft sound of crayons against paper, and I took a breath that felt deeper than any I had taken in years. Not because it was easy, but because it was final. I walked back to the table and sat down next to Noah, watching him color like nothing had changed. And in a way nothing had, because everything that mattered was already here, everything I had built, everything I had protected, everything I had become. And as I looked at him, I realized something that made every step of the journey worth it. They had taken away my place in their family, but they had not taken my ability to build my own. And this time it was one they would never have the power to walk back into.